Let us remain silent as Frank plays the Prelude for today, Great is Thy Faithfulness, by William M. Runyon. Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarian. Tēnā koutou ngā manuhiri, ngā mai, haere mai, ki tēnei whare karakia o te atua. Tēnā koutou, tēnā katoa. My name is Ruby Johnson, and I will be leading the service today. We welcome you into this space, made sacred by Auckland Unitarians for over 124 years. This includes those of you who are joining us online, or who may be watching us at a later date. For those of you in the building with us, please join us after the service for morning tea. It is our sacrament of hospitality. Now, who wants to light the chalice? Any volunteers? Yep. Yes. Today's chalice lighting words are by Craig Rowland. We light this chalice for the ones who arrive disheveled, carrying questions, contradictions, grief half-healed, and dreams still raw. You deserve a place that welcomes your becoming, that knows your fire is not too much, your silence not too little, a place that sees your shadows and still reaches for your light. You deserve a community that listens when you speak your truth, that sits with you in turmoil and rises with you in joy, that believes in your voice even when it trembles. You deserve a circle that brings you hope and coffee and poetry, a place to rest, a place to rise. Let this flame be that place, not perfect, but possible, not without cracks, but full of light. Welcome home. Today's service is part one of what we are aiming to be an ongoing series on spirituality, addressing the question of what the spiritual needs of our congregation might be. I wanted to launch this series because I think that a lot of us have a complicated relationship with spirituality, with religion, and with the concepts and language that surrounds them. I include myself in that group. Some people here are longtime members of either this congregation or of other progressive religious traditions. Others, like myself and several of the other service leaders, come from backgrounds where religion was a painful and oppressive part of life. And yet, many of us have ended up here because we're looking for something that I think we can loosely call spirituality. I know that for me, walking into a church and choosing to spend time here was a difficult thing to do. And I don't think I'm alone in that. What I'm hoping to foster here today is an ongoing dialogue about what we might mean when we use words like spirituality or other language associated with religion, and what role those concepts play in our lives. We've all taken different paths in getting here, and later in today's service, I will share a bit of mine. Will those who are willing please join me in reciting the covenant of our congregation? Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God. We pause at this time to honour the very personal joys and concerns of the congregation. You're invited to come forward and light a candle and share your joy or concern with us, or to simply come forward and light a candle in silence. If you are online, please use the raise hand function to let us know that you would like to speak. I titled today's sermon, Grappling with Spirituality, as a kind of placeholder, but it ended up sticking. The idea of wrestling with spirituality and with religion has been a prominent theme throughout my life. In my early adulthood, I was a very strident atheist, and part of that was really looking down my nose at people whenever they used language that suggested a belief in the divine. But I have a very different perspective now, both about spirituality itself and about how we might talk about it. So today I'm going to give you kind of the Cliff Notes version of why it is that I ended up here doing this sort of thing. Some of the stuff I've talked about before, but in a less narratively cohesive way. Hopefully today I can pull it all together. I wasn't raised in a religious household. God didn't have a role in either of my parents' lives, nor within the lives of my extended family. But I couldn't escape growing up in an environment that was culturally Christian. Even in the early 1990s in relatively secular Aotearoa, I grew up being around a lot of Christian influences. As a baby, I was christened, despite my parents' lack of faith. So even though we didn't go to church or read the Bible or any of that other stuff, I still had a pretty good idea about who God was. The creator that I imagined in my head was molded in a more or less Christian image. My first memories of thinking about God are around age 6. I think this was around the time I had my first religious education classes in school. Those classes were optional, but my mum explained to me what the classes were about and asked if I wanted to go. I was a good kid. I wanted to learn, so I said yes. I also had a friend at school whose parents were church-going. I don't remember how it came up, whether I asked, whether my friend invited me, but one day I ended up going to the kids' church group with my friend. I remember going quite a few times. We'd sing songs while the youth leader played the guitar, sit and listen to Bible stories, and then do arts and crafts. It was nice. Not a bad way to spend a Friday evening for a little kid. And my mum probably needed the time to herself. By this point, my parents had broken up, and Mum and I were living at my grandmother's house. We actually lived right next door to the church that my friend's family attended, so it was really easy to just whip me over there for a couple of hours of childcare. The idea that there was someone up there keeping watch over the world, keeping score of what was happening, was a huge comfort to me. My early family life was full of dysfunction, and I suffered a lot of loss early on. 2 grandparents and 1 great-grandparent passed by the time I was 9. And I knew that I was different from other kids. I didn't realize I was queer yet, but I still had a lot of trouble fitting in. So I think what I needed more than anything else was some kind of certainty that things were going to turn out okay. And a more or less Christian idea of heaven and an afterlife gave me that certainty. I needed a way of making sense of the fact that my loved ones were dying and that I was living in a really difficult situation. So I never doubted for a moment that there was someone up there with some kind of plan that made sense of everything. I just needed that to be true. It would have been unthinkable for it not to be true. I needed to know that someone loved me and was going to take care of things. I think that this is also the mindset in which a lot of people come to religion and spirituality. God is the authority figure who offers hope that things are going to be okay, the way a good parent would. For those of us who weren't well parented, I think that this is also where a lot of spirituality goes wrong. Psychologist Gabor Mate talks about how a child needs 2 things to grow: attachment, which is the child's relationship with their caregivers, and authenticity, which is the child's relationship to their own inner wants and needs. However, as a child, you are totally at the mercy of your caregivers. You need them to feed you, to clothe you, bathe you, and protect you. Ideally, attentive caregivers do all this stuff, but they also foster a safe environment for the child to express authenticity. They hold you, soothe you when things get hard, and let you develop a relationship with your own needs, passions, likes, and dislikes. The problem comes when attachment and authenticity come into conflict. When caregivers are chaotic or dysfunctional, it's harder for the child to get that feeling of safe attachment. We're hardwired for survival. Every child is instinctively motivated to seek love and care, and making sure your caregivers are happy with you is part of that. But of course, as many of you will well know, children aren't always perfectly behaved. Learning to be authentic means learning to voice the things that you want, to complain when something is bothering you, and to let people know whether you're happy or unhappy. Sometimes our needs are reasonable, and sometimes they aren't. Regardless, it's important for each of us to learn that we have needs. But when a caregiver isn't reliable or attentive, when a child isn't certain that their basic attachment needs are going to be met, they are left with a heartbreaking dilemma. A young child fundamentally lacks control over their circumstances. They can't leave their caregivers. Sorry, I lost my place. They can't leave their caregivers, nor do they have the ability to force their caregivers to act differently or to set boundaries with them. All the child can really do is try to squash their needs down, make themselves smaller, less demanding, and hope that this will fix the situation. Blaming the caregivers wouldn't help. It would be unthinkable. So the child learns to conclude that something must be wrong with them and with the things that they want and need. Basically, children will always sacrifice their authenticity in order to try to maintain their attachment. You see a lot of this, I think, in how people approach the idea of God. There's a lot of guilt, shame, and self-recrimination. When I tell people that I used to pray to God like this as a child, that I'd apologize for being a bad kid, that I'd worry about going to hell, they sometimes ask, "Oh, were you raised Catholic?" Well, no, but I did learn to blame myself for a lot of things from very early on. I think this has pretty much become the predominant Western view of spirituality, or at least spirituality as connected to organized religion. Words like God, church, sermon, sacred, worship, prayer, faith, etc. all conjure this image of a rigid and unforgiving authority figure, someone whose commands need to be obeyed or else, someone before whom you need to grovel and beg. I kept a kind of vague belief in a higher power throughout most of my adolescence. I was a lot more skeptical about the Bible itself and the stories it contained. A lot of this was owing to the fact that I was a complete dinosaur nut as a kid. So I knew for sure that the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark were both questionable. I have a different word in here, but there were children in here a moment ago, so I had to quickly sort of move things around. Questionable. I got really into Egyptian mythology at age 10, and then Greek mythology a year later. So I became aware that there were lots of different belief systems that predated the Christian one. This also began to intersect with what I'll call the gender stuff. I started to wonder why Christianity had a male god when more ancient belief systems had goddesses as well. Sometimes I'd lay awake at night and imagine God as a woman. When I think about that period, I can really see the beginnings of who I am today. Of course, 9/11 happened in the middle of this as well, and that taught me about concepts like religious extremism. And as I grew through my teens to the realization that maybe I was different to my peers in other ways, I started to see religion as something actively hostile to me. I was 13 when I saw a Destiny Church on television protesting against the civil union bill outside of Parliament. But I still had that desperate need for connection that I saw in religious communities. When I was about 16, I made friends with a group of conservative Christian girls at school. This was basically because they're probably about the only girls that would tolerate being around me because I was, a teenager. And they were like, "We can save this one, it's fine. We can do our charitable works." I ended up going to church with them for the rest of the year, and even went to a Bible camp in Taranaki just before Christmas. I started praying again, spent time with my new friends and their families, and honestly considered formally joining the church. But I couldn't shake my skepticism. And more than that, it was becoming increasingly obvious to me that if I were honest about a lot of the things I was feeling inside, I wouldn't have been welcome there. I stopped going. By 17, I'd fallen into a deep depression, given up on any belief in any kind of higher power, and become extremely antagonistic about the idea of anyone having any kind of religious belief. I was relentlessly committed to the idea that I was being rational, logical, and reasonable whenever I talked down to someone based on their spirituality, even when that worldview represented a lot of bitterness, resentment, and self-loathing on my part. The road between where I was at 17 with spirituality and where I am with it at 35 is too long and winding to fully unpack today. But transitioning definitely played a role in changing my perspective. I was put in a situation of explaining something about myself that was deeply personal and hard to comprehend for a lot of the people around me. Throughout that journey, I've had to balance how I felt about spirituality as an abstract concept versus religious institutions that are very often deeply oppressive. But one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people I held up as role models in my late teens really aren't very nice people. A lot of the scientists and public intellectuals who claim to be acting in the name of pure rationality against the oppressive forces of religion are actually quite happy taking up deeply regressive political positions now. Now, obviously, I think rationality is frequently a good thing. I do enjoy modern medicine, for example. But I don't think it's an absolute good. There are plenty of things that we miss in life if we go around trying to endlessly rationalize the human experience rather than living in it. Most dangerously, it becomes easy to write other people and their perspectives off as irrational and therefore worthy of contempt. We each live a life full of rich subjective experiences that are, I think, impossible to render in purely rational terms. Which brings me back to my earlier point about the language of faith. Because words like God, church, sermon, sacred, worship, prayer, faith, etc. Those words still make me uncomfortable. But for me, that discomfort is complicated. It isn't just a matter of wanting to reject those words because of the regressive political connotations they often carry. These words are also uncomfortable because I wanted so badly to be able to use and own those words when I was younger. Like that child who has to sacrifice authenticity for attachment, I learned that those words weren't for me, and that any attempt to authentically express myself through them was hopeless. And once I realized in my late teens that that attachment to a Christianized concept of God was no longer viable for me, I didn't immediately rediscover my authenticity. I just broke down. Now, if religious language just doesn't do anything for you, that's fine. But I found that when I let my disdain for those words take over the steering wheel in the name of rationality, that I end up writing off a whole swathe of human experience. Now, of course, we can come up with new language for these concepts. That's fine too. However, I think there's tremendous power in reclaiming words as well. For example, queer is a reclaimed word, one that would have been considered a straight-up slur within the lifetimes of many of the people in this room. I think there's a strong case that reclaiming the language of faith is actually a social and moral good. If we say that this language is irredeemable, then those words and the concepts they represent are left up for grabs by the likes of Brian Tamaki. So for me, being a Unitarian isn't about fleeing an association with religion, even though that association often makes me feel a lot of uncomfortable stuff. Sometimes I get down from talking up here and I feel kind of queasy. This involves exactly the kind of authentic expression that I had to suppress when I was younger. But that's exactly what makes it important. And that's why I have to keep doing this, especially when it's difficult. Today's closing words are by Alan Watts, which, how typical of me, of course. Of course they're by Alan Watts. It's like the one writer I know, apparently. You are all as much extraordinary phenomenon of nature as trees, clouds, the patterns in running water, the flickering of fire, the arrangement of the stars, and the form of a galaxy. You are all just like that, and there is nothing wrong with you at all. We extinguish the chalice. Cute. Ted, could you bring up the... You're right. Sorry. I need to do semaphore or something to sort of... I'm just up here, I'm going along, and then I turn, and then I go, oh, whoops, okay. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Well, we'll have small group discussions in a moment, but first, let us remain silent as Frank plays the postlude, First Love by Hikaru Utada. Thank you, Frank. So I've got a couple of discussion questions for us. If you're new here, we just break out into groups of about 5 or 6 people to mull over some questions. So the questions are there any religious or spiritual words that you feel a connection to but struggle to use? And if you were being truly authentic, how would you engage with the language of spirituality?